The Milwaukee Bucks won the NBA championship in 2021 behind the heroic play of Giannis Antetokoumpo. This was the season in which Giannis rose through the ranks of history and cemented himself as an all-time great NBA player and talent. However, while Giannis was rising through the ranks, something else was happening, something much more melancholic. Ben Simmons, the touted number 1 overall pick, made one of the most baffling plays in the NBA playoffs that year by passing up on an open layup because he was supposedly scared. You might be wondering, what was there to be scared about? He has a near 10-inch advantage on Trae Young. Well, over the course of the 76ers vs Hawks series, in which the 76ers were the overwhelming favourites, the Hawks started to use the hack a Shaq strategy. This is the strategy where the Hawks would foul a poor free throw shooter, anticipating their miss in hopes of regaining possession of the basketball. And as it would turn out, Ben Simmons was the target of this strategy. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with the NBA, a free throw is the most basic skill which every player should have gained some mastery over before even entering the league. So, why was the number 1 overall pick like Ben Simmons afraid to shoot a free throw? Why was the number 1 talent in the NBA draft not only unable but unwilling to shoot free throws at an elite level? Well, answer is simple. He never had to. Ben Simmons was born out of the womb with extreme levels of talent for the game of basketball, and even though he had to work hard to hone his talent, he never had to punish himself the way other NBA level prospects with lesser talent had to. In this video, I will be comparing and contrasting the mindsets between Giannis Antetokoumpo and Ben Simmons illustrate the role that suffering can play in helping one improve throughout life. But first, let's talk about suffering is a state of undergoing pain, distress, and hardship. It is safe to say that we've all suffered at some point in our life, whether it was stubbing your toe on the door or something much more intense like losing a loved one. Suffering is an inherent part of the human experience. We all suffer in some way or another, but how we suffer varies from person to person. Suffering can make us more resilient and better able to endure hardships. Just like a muscle, in order to build up strength, we must put it through vigorous amount of work and pain. Likewise, we must put our mind through a vigorous amount of conditioning in order to strengthen it. But just like training, you can't do any random exercises and expect to reach a desired goal. So further on in this video, I will explain why the way one suffers is just as important as suffering itself. Before we can go any further, I must take a few moments to compare Giannis and Ben Simmons. Now, Giannis is celebrated as a determined, hard-working, and one of the most universally respected players across the league. However, this was not always the case. Giannis came into the league as a no-name rookie, and there weren't many expectations placed on his shoulders by the general public. It took years of dedication for him to reach the point that he's currently at. On the other hand, Ben Simmons has been touted as a basketball prodigy from the moment he could hold a ball. He was one of the most hyped prospects to enter the league in a long while. The stellar rookie campaign did nothing to ease the increasing hype and expectations. Now, since each of their respective rookie campaigns, Giannis has continuously ascended until he became a consensus top 3 player in the league, while Ben Simmons has appeared to plateaued and even regressed in some aspects of his game. What makes the Ben Simmons and Giannis comparison interesting is because they have very similar physical profiles. Both are tall, super athletic big men with guard-like instinct. Both also had significant holes in their game, such as a lack of shooting ability and, in the case of Giannis, a lack of size. So, why has Giannis managed to get better and gain the respect of the public while the opposite seems true for Ben Simmons? Well, I believe it comes down to the way they both suffered. And like I said earlier, I don't believe that all suffering is created equal. So, let's take a moment to look at how Giannis chose to suffer. Giannis is no stranger to suffering. He and his brothers grew up with nothing. and they had to roam the streets of Greece selling knickknacks such as watches and DVDs in order to help their family get by. After reaching the league, Giannis had a clear issue that he needed to work on. His frame was simply too small, and over the course of his career, Giannis went on to put on over 57 pounds of muscle. If you aren't familiar with working out, it may be hard to truly put into perspective how hard it was for someone to put on that much muscle, especially while doing a cardio-intense sport such as basketball where you can burn thousands of calories per day. It's safe to assume that there were many nights of Giannis forcing himself to eat more food than he wanted, along with grueling weight room sessions which left him drained and sore. However, it is important to note that Giannis chose to put himself through this pain and suffering so he could 1. Reap the benefits of having a stronger and more athletic body, 2. Develop the resilience necessary to overcome the next inevitable obstacle. It is important to note that Giannis was already used to suffering from his upbringing, so he was already both mentally and physically familiar with the idea of putting himself through the ringer in a pursuit of reaching a higher goal. I believe this is where the difference between him and Ben Simmons lies. Giannis was a known poor shooter, but he still practiced his jump shots and attempted them during the game. He was willing to put himself through the embarrassment of missing shots in pursuit of becoming a better shooter. Essentially, Giannis chose his suffering, while Ben Simmons chose not to attempt any jump shots in a bid to avoid embarrassment. This culminated in Giannis being able to go 15 of 17 from the free throw line in a crucial closeout game of the finals, even though he was always a below average shooter. But because he chose to endure the embarrassment of missing shots beforehand, he had the requisite mental toughness, focus, and jump shot repetitions in order to overcome what appeared to be an insurmountable task of letting the opponent pay for sending him to the free throw line. However, when you contrast the situation to that of Ben Simmons, it's clear that Ben Simmons never embraced the suffering of trying to become a better shooter. He was unable to push himself to become a better player, and this led to him crumbling mentally when the lights were brightest. The Hawks played the 76ers 7 times in that series, and Ben Simmons only attempted 1 shot in the 4th quarter over the final 4 games. This putrid no-show performance was not the result of a bad offensive scheme, but the result of a player who avoided suffering and thus was not mentally resilient enough to face the pressure. We all know the boiling point of this series, the embarrassing moment where Ben Simmons passed up a wide open layup since he was afraid to be fouled. That play sealed the fate of the 76ers, who had now lost to the Hawks in spite of being the overwhelming favorites. What is most ironic about the situation is the fact that suffering is an inherent part of the human experience. So, Ben Simmons did eventually suffer when he embarrassed himself on the court and when he received tons of backlash from the fans, media, and even his own coach and teammates. This is why I believe it is important for us to choose the way we suffer. He could have chose to suffer in practice. He could have chose to suffer in regular season games in order to improve his jump shot, but he didn't. And instead, he received a different kind of suffering, one which is far less constructive and beneficial. When you compare their rookie seasons, most people would not predict that Giannis would be the person who went on to be a consensus top 3 player in the league, while Ben Simmons would be the person who became a laughingstock and meme. In conclusion, suffering is important because it can build resilience and character. Suffering is also something that is inevitable, so it's best that you choose the way that you suffer and use it as a tool to advance your life, as opposed to trying to avoid suffering and end up receiving it